Have you ever wondered if the way you use cannabis is quietly reshaping your spiritual path? Not just your mood, your thoughts, or your body, but your very soul. Right now, millions of people are lighting up without realizing they're entering a portal, one that doesn't just open to peace and inspiration, but to shadows they've never been taught to face. For centuries, this plant has been revered as sacred, even feared as dangerous by mystics and shamans who understood its true power. But today, that ancient reverence has been buried beneath casual consumption and clever marketing. I've spent years diving into suppressed mystical texts, ancient rituals, and first-hand spiritual accounts that reveal a truth almost no one is talking about. You can either ignore this and continue smoking without reflection, or in the next few minutes, you can uncover the hidden spiritual consequences of cannabis that no one warned you about, but your soul has always felt. You probably never thought of cannabis as a mirror, but every time you inhale, every time you engage with the spirit of that plant, you're not just relaxing. You're entering into a dialogue, not with the world, not with your thoughts, but with the unseen dimensions of yourself, the places you usually keep hidden. The ancient ones understood this. They never saw cannabis as a toy or a trend. They saw it as a tool, a living entity. A plant spirit, capable of opening doors and exposing everything you're not ready to see. You live in a time where cannabis is more accessible than ever. It's legal in many places, sold in polished stores with friendly labels, glowing reviews, and soft promises of peace, creativity, and pain relief. But strip away the marketing and something older, more primal remains. This isn't just a plant, it's a frequency tuner, a consciousness amplifier, and depending on what's already within you, that amplification can become a spiritual catalyst or a silent curse. The truth is, cannabis doesn't care who you are. It doesn't have a moral compass. It doesn't know your trauma, your discipline, your longing for truth. It simply reflects. It takes whatever energy you carry, your fears, your fantasies, your fragments, and magnifies them. That's why two people can smoke the same strain and have radically different experiences. One might feel blissful, elevated, even euphoric. The other might spiral into anxiety, detachment, or numbing emptiness. It's not about the plant, it's about what the plant reveals. And that's the part no one wants to talk about. Because it's easy to romanticize cannabis, to call it natural, harmless, even holy. But here's the paradox. Something can be natural and still be dangerous. Something can be holy and still require reverence. That's what we've lost in modern times. Reverence, the sacred relationship, the ritual, the preparation, the intention. In ancient India, cannabis wasn't a Friday night escape. It was offered to Shiva, the god of destruction, yes, but also the god of transformation. Mystics would sit in silence, consume the plant, and meditate for hours, sometimes days, allowing the herb to guide them into deep states of consciousness. They knew they were invoking something powerful. They treated cannabis as a portal to the divine, not a shortcut, not an entertainment, but a sacred bridge between the seen and the unseen. And you, whether you realize it or not, are invoking that same energy every time you light up. The question is, are you ready for what it shows you? Because cannabis doesn't just open the heart or expand the mind, it also opens the basement, the buried memories, the unresolved wounds, the shadow. And unless you've done the spiritual work, unless you've cultivated grounding, discernment, and clarity, those doors can become overwhelming. That high you feel, it's not just elevation. Sometimes it's your soul saying, look at this. You might have felt it, that strange sensation after the euphoria fades. A sense of being unanchored, distant from yourself, like you're floating just outside your own skin. And yet, you keep returning to the plant. Why? Because part of you remembers that first glimpse of peace, that first flash of insight, that first moment where the world felt bigger, softer, more magical. But the plant never promised permanence. It offered a glimpse, not a guarantee. And here's the trap. When you chase that glimpse without integration, without grounding it in your real awake life, it becomes a loop. You light up, you feel free, and then it fades. So you light up again, not out of curiosity, but out of craving, out of need. And slowly the sacred becomes casual. The tool becomes a toy. The portal becomes a pacifier. and your spirit knows the difference. The problem isn't cannabis, it's how we approach it. You wouldn't drink ayahuasca while scrolling on your phone. You wouldn't take mushrooms at a shopping mall and expect clarity. But cannabis? You can smoke it on your lunch break, at a party, on your couch. And that's the danger. It's sacred power, disguised as a convenience. It's ritual, disguised as routine. And when you use sacred things casually, there is always a consequence. Not in the way you've been told, not in the form of jail time or addiction statistics, but in the subtle, spiritual way, the way your aura dulls, your third eye clouds, your intuition gets muddy. You stop hearing the whisper of your higher self, not because it's gone, but because you're too fogged up to receive it. And you might not even notice, because cannabis doesn't just open the door to the divine, it can also open the door to illusion, to false clarity, to ideas that feel deep but aren't rooted in truth, and that's where the ego creeps in. You start believing you're spiritual because you smoke. You start quoting mystical ideas you heard while high. But the real test of spiritual growth isn't how you feel when you're high, it's who you are when you're sober. Can you still hold that love, that presence, that peace? If not, then maybe it wasn't growth, maybe it was just sensation. There's a difference. And no one talks about it, because in a world obsessed with pleasure, slowing down to reflect feels like a betrayal. But real spirituality isn't always pleasurable. Sometimes it's raw. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's just you, sitting with yourself, facing the discomfort you've been trying to escape. Cannabis, when used with reverence, can help you face it, but when used recklessly, it becomes another mask. Another filter, another way to avoid. And the soul doesn't evolve through avoidance. It evolves through presence, through awareness, through courage. You may not realize it, but every spiritual tool comes with an invitation and a responsibility. Just like fire can warm your home or burn it to the ground, cannabis can either awaken your spirit or lull it into slumber. And the difference lies in one simple word: intention. Not the surface-level intention of wanting to feel better or escape a hard day, but a sacred, soul-rooted intention. Why are you communing with this plant? What are you asking of it? What are you offering in return? Because in many cultures the plant is not seen as a product, it's seen as a being, a teacher, a guardian, a trickster, even. In Taoist ceremonies, cannabis was used to help sages soften the boundaries between the seen and the unseen, but only after years of spiritual discipline. Not everyone was permitted to use it. You had to prove you were ready, that you had the spiritual maturity to face what might come through that open door. In Sufi traditions, cannabis was whispered about, used in secret among mystics who danced in the desert and sang to the stars. They didn't use it to get high, they used it to dissolve the self, to lose their small I and touch the beloved. But even then the elders would warn, if your ego is still in the room, you'll never find God. You'll only find your own reflection dressed up in divine robes. That's the danger of spiritual illusion. And cannabis, when misused, can become its most convincing disguise. Because the plant doesn't lie, but it doesn't protect you from your own projections either. It will show you what you carry. If you have joy, it will magnify it. If you have fear, it will amplify that too. If you carry unresolved wounds, trauma you've ignored, stories you haven't rewritten, emotions you've buried, cannabis doesn't fix them, it exposes them. Sometimes gently, sometimes violently. And when you don't know how to work with what rises, it becomes overwhelming. You feel lost, scattered, confused. And then you smoke again, hoping the feeling will pass. But the plant was never meant to carry your healing. That's your job. All it can do is reveal. And in that way, cannabis is an initiator. It doesn't give you the answers, but it holds up a mirror. The real question is, do you look? And if you do, can you sit with what you see? Carl Jung spoke about the shadow, the parts of yourself you suppress, reject, or forget, the anger, the shame, the doubt. Cannabis doesn't erase the shadow, it often brings it to the surface, and when that happens, you have a choice. You can integrate or you can escape. But integration takes work. It takes journaling, breathwork, meditation, community, honesty. It takes the humility to say, I saw something in me I didn't want to see, and now I choose to heal it. But healing is not the same as numbing, and unfortunately, cannabis can become a numbing agent disguised as a healer. You start using it to unwind, then to sleep, then to feel anything at all. And slowly the world becomes a little dimmer. Your joy feels muted, your emotions feel distant. Life feels less vivid. Unless you're high. That's when the plant has stopped being a guide and started becoming a crutch. And your soul can feel that. Your spirit knows when you're bypassing the work. It knows when you're using cannabis to get closer to the truth, and when you're using it to hide. And hiding never brings you home. It only prolongs the journey. In some indigenous traditions, cannabis was smoked before ceremonies not to induce pleasure, but to open vision, to communicate with ancestors, to receive messages from the earth. It was treated with the same respect you would give to a sacred altar or a holy text. You didn't overuse it. You didn't abuse it. You approached it with clean energy, a clear heart, and a grounded body. But today that grounding is missing. And that's what makes cannabis so dangerous to the unprepared. When your roots aren't deep, any wind can carry you, and the more you float, the more you disconnect from your body, your presence, your truth. You become untethered. And that's not spirituality, that's escapism, wearing a sacred mask. There's a difference between getting high and rising, and you know it. Deep down, you feel the difference. When you've used the plant with reverence, with ritual, with respect, you've touched something real. You've felt those moments of deep stillness, of cosmic connection, of inner clarity that words can't describe. And in those moments, it felt like cannabis opened a door to God. But when you've used it without intention, out of habit or to avoid your pain, you've also felt the dullness, the apathy, the emptiness, that haunting feeling that you're floating through life disconnected from yourself. And that's not the plant's fault, that's your practice. Because any sacred tool, when misused, becomes poison. And it's not about quantity, it's about quality. It's not about how much you use, but why you use. Are you engaging the plant with humility, with clarity, with respect? Or are you relying on it to regulate emotions you haven't learned to sit with, to make life more bearable rather than more beautiful? Because cannabis doesn't make your life magical, you do. The plant just magnifies what's already there. And if what's there is confusion, fear, unresolved trauma, then that's what will rise. And that's not to punish you, that's to awaken you. Because your soul isn't interested in keeping you comfortable, it's interested in making you conscious. And cannabis, when used consciously, can be a profound ally, but when used carelessly, it becomes a subtle saboteur. It keeps you in limbo, never truly lost, but never fully found. So you hover, you loop, you escape, you glow, just enough to feel spiritual, but not enough to burn through illusion. And the deeper truths, the kind that require silence, discipline, and stillness, stay just out of reach. And maybe you've felt that. Maybe part of you is wondering, is this helping me evolve, or is this just helping me cope? Only you can answer that. But the moment you ask the question with honesty, the healing begins. The question isn't whether cannabis is spiritual. The question is, are you spiritual when you use it? Because the plant doesn't initiate you. You initiate yourself through the way you engage with it. You become the ceremony. Your breath, your thoughts, your body, your presence, they are the altar. And if you enter that space casually, you will exit it confused. But if you enter with devotion, something sacred begins to unfold. Not instantly, not always blissfully, but truthfully. And truth is what you're here for. That's why your soul was drawn to this message in the first place. Because some part of you knows. You felt the difference. The nights where it helped you connect, and the ones where it left you hollow. The insights that felt divine, and the ones that were just mental noise dressed up in mystical language. You see, the mind is clever, especially when it's high. It can fabricate wisdom. It can create illusions of depth. But real transformation doesn't happen in your thoughts. It happens in your being, in how you show up when no one is watching, in how you respond to pain, to people, to the parts of yourself you've tried to forget. Cannabis can reveal those parts, but it can't heal them for you. That's your job, and that's why spiritual traditions across the globe never used psychoactive plants in isolation. There was always structure. There was fasting, preparation, ritual, guidance, community, elders, integration. There was a container for the sacred, because without a container, even the holiest experience spills into confusion. That's the risk of casual use. You're opening spiritual doors in an unclean house, and when those doors open, you don't just let in light, you let in everything, entities, emotions, thought forms, energies that don't belong to you. And if your aura is weak, if your field is scattered, those energies can attach, linger, influence, drain. But no one talks about that in dispensaries. No one hands you a flyer on spiritual hygiene when you buy an eighth. And so the cycle continues. Sacred energy poured into unconscious rituals, ancient portals used like party favors, and souls drifting further from their center, all while believing they're getting closer. Because the illusion is comforting. It gives you the feeling of awakening without the work, the glow without the fire. But spiritual growth isn't soft. It's fierce. It's cleansing. It burns away what doesn't serve. And that's the part the ego resists. Because the ego wants to feel good, but the soul wants to become whole. And wholeness requires shadow. It requires facing the parts of yourself you've smoked over, laughed over, numbed over, the wounds you've buried beneath clouds of smoke and called it peace. But peace isn't the absence of discomfort, it's the presence of awareness. And cannabis can give you that, but only if you're willing to do the real work when it fades. The integration, the embodiment, the facing, not just feeling something profound, but becoming something new because of it. That's where the true transformation lives, not in the high, but in the return, in the way you live once the glow is gone, in the choices you make when you're fully sober, fully present, fully you. So ask yourself, who are you when the smoke clears? Can you hold the insight you received while high and translate it into action? Can you take the love you felt and speak it to someone you've been avoiding? Can you bring the peace you touched and anchor it in your daily life, your habits, your relationships? If not, then maybe you weren't communing with spirit. Maybe you were just chasing sensation. And that's okay, that doesn't make you bad, it makes you human. But now you're waking up, now you're seeing, and once you see, you can't unsee. You can begin to shift, to choose, to reclaim your relationship with the plant, to make it sacred again. Because it can be, it wants to be. The spirit of cannabis isn't offended by your misuse, it's just waiting for you to remember that this isn't a product. It's a portal, and portals require preparation. So before your next session, pause. Don't just reach for the lighter. Sit, breathe. Ask yourself, am I ready to be shown something? Or am I just trying to escape? That single question could change everything. Because intention is frequency, and frequency is what determines what meets you on the other side. If you approach cannabis with reverence, the experience becomes a ceremony. The smoke becomes incense, the inhale becomes prayer, and the plant responds differently. It doesn't take you out of yourself, it takes you deeper into who you truly are. But reverence isn't just a mindset, it's a practice. It means cleaning your space before you consume, saying a prayer, drinking water, sitting in silence, setting a clear intention, listening more than speaking, journaling after, reflecting days later. It means treating the plant as if it were a wise elder, because in many ways it is. It's lived for thousands of years. It's been in temples, caves, rituals, visions. It's watched civilizations rise and fall, and now it's with you. In your hands, entering your lungs, moving through your blood, whispering into your consciousness. Can you feel that? Because if you can, then something sacred has already begun. And if you can't, that's okay. That's where the practice starts. You don't need to be perfect, you just need to be present. You just need to ask the question, Am I willing to meet this plant in truth? Am I willing to meet myself in truth? Because that's where everything shifts. When cannabis stops being a way to leave and becomes a way to return. To your body, to your breath, to your heart, to the places within you that long to be felt, to the voice inside that's been waiting for silence, for space, for you to slow down long enough to hear it. That voice, it's not the high, it's not the buzz, it's not the rush of colors or thoughts or sensations. It's the stillness beneath it all, the stillness that is always there, always waiting, always whole. That's the voice of your soul, and the plant, when honored, can help you find your way back to it. You weren't meant to numb your way through life, you were meant to feel it, to be touched by it, to walk through joy and grief and revelation with your eyes open and your heart intact. Cannabis at its most sacred doesn't remove you from your experience, it deepens it, but only when your foundation is strong, only when your roots go deep enough to hold you steady as you reach for higher realms. Without roots you don't rise, you drift. And maybe you've been drifting. Maybe you've confused detachment for peace. Maybe you've been calling stillness what is actually stagnation. There's a difference between being calm and being emotionally disconnected. And cannabis, when overused or unconsciously consumed, can make the difference hard to see. It smooths the edges, softens the noise, dims the signals. You start to feel okay with everything, even the things you shouldn't be okay with. You stop noticing the small ways your light dims, and over time you confuse that dimming with wisdom. But wisdom doesn't come from dullness. It comes from clarity. It comes from being fully awake, even when it's uncomfortable. Especially when it's uncomfortable. There's a kind of courage required to be present with yourself fully, sober, without the veil of smoke, without the emotional buffer of cannabis softening the moment. To feel your anxiety as it is, to witness your thoughts in their raw form, to sit in your body and listen to what it's trying to say. That's where spiritual maturity is born, not in escape, but in deep engagement with reality. And the truth is, cannabis can help you go there, but not when it's used carelessly, not when it's used to suppress, to avoid, or to entertain the mind without grounding the spirit. If you use it with no intention, it will carry you wherever your subconscious is already going. It becomes an elevator with no buttons, just rising and falling with the tides of your unprocessed emotion. And that can be beautiful, or it can be dangerous, because you're not just interacting with a plant, you're interacting with the spiritual circuitry of your own being. You're inviting amplification. So if your thoughts are chaotic, that chaos will be magnified. If your energy is scattered, the scattering will deepen. If your heart is heavy, it might feel unbearable. And unless you know how to sit with what arises, unless you're practiced in the art of shadow work and energy hygiene, you might mistake a spiritual confrontation for a spiritual failure. But nothing you feel under the influence of cannabis is random. It's all information. It's a language. And like any sacred language, it requires translation. That's what integration is, sitting down the next day or later that night and asking, what did that experience show me? What was the lesson? What was the energy behind the visuals, the thoughts, the sensations? What was the truth trying to reveal itself through that fog? Because without integration, you're not growing. You're just looping, chasing new sensations instead of expanding into new awareness. And that loop can feel like a kind of pseudo-spirituality. You light a candle, you smoke, you journal a few deep thoughts. But then what? Are you kinder the next day? Are you clearer in your choices? Are you more loving to the people in your life? Are you more honest with yourself? If not, then ask, what am I really seeking when I smoke? That question opens the door to truth. And the truth is, most people aren't seeking spirit, they're seeking relief. And there's nothing wrong with needing relief. Life is overwhelming, the world is loud, but sacred tools aren't meant to be used as shortcuts around your pain, they're meant to be doorways through it. And that's the part people often avoid, the through, because going through means facing the wound, touching the grief, hearing the stories you've buried. And sometimes cannabis brings those stories to the surface. Not to torment you, but to liberate you. Because you can't heal what you won't feel. But healing isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's just choosing to sit with a feeling instead of escaping it. Sometimes it's remembering to breathe when the tension comes. Sometimes it's putting the pipe down and asking, can I meet myself here without the veil? That moment of choice is where your power lives. It's where your discernment begins to sharpen. It's where the line between sacred and habitual starts to become clear. And when that clarity comes, everything changes. Cannabis becomes a teacher again. The smoke becomes an offering. Your body becomes a vessel, your space becomes a temple, and your soul begins to trust you again. Because your soul is always watching, not in judgment, but in deep patience. It watches how you treat your own body. It watches how you approach sacred things. It knows when you're using something to open a door, and when you're using it to shut one. And the more you honor that knowing, the louder your intuition becomes. That's the true gift of this path. Not just insight, not just mystical experiences, but the quiet rebuilding of trust between you and your own soul. And cannabis, when treated with the reverence it deserves, can support that rebuilding, but only if you lead with humility, only if you approach it not as an escape hatch, but as a sacred bridge. That bridge can lead you inward. It can show you where you've disconnected, where you've been hiding, where you've lost your way, but it can also show you where your light is buried, where your peace lives, where your love still burns beneath the rubble. The plant doesn't choose the destination, you do. So choose wisely, choose with awareness. Choose with the heart of a seeker, not the habits of a consumer. Ask yourself, how do I want to meet this plant today? Not just what strain will I use, but what spirit will I bring? Am I meeting it as an offering to myself, as a communion with something higher, or as a crutch I've forgotten how to walk without? There's no shame in the answer, only awakening, only the chance to begin again. And you can begin again, right now. Whether you've used this plant unconsciously for years or you're just starting to question your relationship with it, this is your moment. Not to quit out of guilt, not to judge yourself, but to remember the truth. The plant isn't the problem, it's the portal. And you are the one who decides how you walk through it. There is a kind of reverence that can only be born from direct experience, not just knowledge or research or something you read in a book, but the moment you feel the plant watching you back. That strange, unmistakable awareness that you're not alone in your ritual, that something ancient is present. Something intelligent, something that knows exactly where to take you if you're willing to listen, and if you're not, it will take you anyway. But it won't guide you, it will simply reflect you. That's the difference between a guided journey and an echo chamber, and most people aren't on guided journeys. They're stuck in psychic loops, repeating the same thoughts, having the same visions, feeling the same feelings over and over, mistaking the cycle for progress. But circles don't take you forward, they keep you busy, they keep you high, and eventually they keep you lost. It's seductive, because cannabis doesn't slam you into alternate dimensions like other plant teachers. It whispers, it seeps in, it bends the edges of perception just enough to make the illusion feel like insight. And that's where the spiritual danger lies, not in the plant itself, but in how easy it becomes to confuse stimulation with evolution. You feel something, you write it down, it sounds profound, but does it change you? Does it break an old pattern? Does it make you more present, more kind, more honest? Because real spiritual work always touches your behavior. If your insights stay trapped in your journal, if your realizations evaporate the moment the high wears off, then something is missing. And it's not the plant. It's the structure. It's the sacred discipline that turns experience into transformation. In ancient traditions, that structure was everything. You didn't just consume and hope for the best. You prepared, you fasted, you purified your space. You spoke your intention out loud. And when the plant spirit came, you didn't distract yourself. You didn't scroll. You didn't reach for snacks or noise or stimulation. You received. You listened. You let the medicine do its work. Not to entertain you, but to reveal you to yourself. But now the ritual has been replaced by routine. You light up during Netflix. You vape while running errands. You microdose before work. It's become background noise, and anything that's sacred, when reduced to background noise, starts to decay the spirit instead of awaken it. Because everything vibrates: your words, your thoughts, your space, your frequency. And the plant doesn't respond to your words, it responds to your vibration. You can call it sacred all you want, but if your energy is unconscious, scattered, avoidant, that's what the plant will mirror. And over time, that mirroring creates distortion. Not because the plant is dark, but because the unconscious use of sacred tools always leads to spiritual dissonance. You feel a little less alive, a little less clear. Your dreams dull. Your gut wisdom fades. You stop feeling pulled toward growth and start feeling lulled into complacency. You mistake stillness for stuckness. You confuse peace with numbness. And somewhere in your soul a quiet ache begins to form, because it remembers what this plant is really for. It remembers the doorway, and it's tired of using the doorway as a wall. But the beautiful thing is, you can reverse this at any time. You can reclaim the sacred. You can rebuild your relationship with cannabis from the ground up, not by quitting cold turkey out of guilt or fear, but by pausing, by asking better questions, by remembering that this is a relationship, and like all relationships, it responds to presence, intention, respect, and honesty. You can begin by not smoking, just sitting with the plant, in your hand, in silence, and noticing what it says when you don't consume it. What comes up when you're not high? What part of you resists the stillness? What emotion rises when the ritual becomes inward rather than upward? Because sometimes we chase elevation to avoid descent. But the soul doesn't rise by escaping, it rises by integrating. And cannabis can reveal what needs integrating, but only if you're willing to listen in the silence between the highs. Ask yourself, what part of me do I hand over when I consume this? What part of my power am I outsourcing to a sensation? What am I afraid to feel without it? And more importantly, what might be waiting for me on the other side of that fear? That's where the plant can truly serve. Not as a mask, not as an identity, not as a daily ritual without depth, but as a sacred ally you consult only when your heart is open and your soul is ready. Imagine if you used cannabis not casually but ceremonially. If you gave it the same respect you'd give a sacred teacher. If you didn't reach for it to escape, but waited until you were called to it. Imagine the difference in what it would show you. Imagine the depth you could access if your body was cleansed, your mind quiet, your intention clear. You might start to see visions you've never seen before, feel energy you've forgotten existed, hear messages not from your ego but from your soul. You might meet parts of yourself that have been waiting for your presence, not your high, your presence. And in that presence, healing happens. Not the kind of healing that feels like fireworks, but the kind that feels like remembering. Like returning, like slowly coming home to yourself after a long detour through the fog. Because cannabis isn't your enemy. It's not trying to hurt you. It's trying to show you something. The question is, are you grounded enough to receive the truth it's pointing toward? Are you clear enough to walk through the door without getting lost in the hallway? The deeper the tool, the sharper the edge. And this is a deep, ancient, cosmic tool, one that deserves your attention, not just when you're using it, but when you're not. Because how you treat sacred things when you're not in ceremony reveals everything about your spiritual maturity. So reflect, recalibrate, ask again, what is my relationship to this plant teaching me about my relationship to myself? And in that answer you may just find the clarity your soul has been calling for all along. Sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is say no. Not out of resistance, not out of judgment, but out of reverence. Reverence for your body. Reverence for your consciousness. Reverence for the path you're walking. Because not every sacred tool is meant for every stage of your journey. There are times when the door needs to stay closed, so your soul can learn how to build its own fire without the spark of an external substance. There's a strength that grows in the stillness of abstinence, The kind of clarity that sharpens when you remove the veil and meet yourself exactly as you are, unfiltered, unsoftened, unamplified. And it's in that rawness, in that uncomfortable honesty, where true spiritual growth takes root. It's not about demonizing cannabis. It's about asking, is this serving who I'm becoming? It's about discerning when a tool becomes a tether, when the sacred turns into sedation. Because sedation feels peaceful, it feels quiet, but it also makes you forget. It makes you forget your power, your purpose, your pain. And if you forget your pain too quickly, you also forget how to transmute it. You lose the alchemy that turns wounds into wisdom. Cannabis can slow the mind, but it can also dull the edge of your intuition. It can enhance sensation, but it can also make it harder to tell the difference between inner guidance and amplified emotion. It can make you feel connected to everything, yet subtly separate from your embodied self. And after enough time, that subtle separation becomes normal. You stop noticing that you've drifted. And that's the risk, because drifting isn't floating, drifting is forgetting, drifting is losing touch with the gravity that pulls you toward your deepest truth. And your truth doesn't need to be high to be holy. In fact, sometimes the holiest thing is grounded presence. That moment you feel the weight of your body in the chair, the air in your lungs, the sound of your own breath moving through you. That moment you realize this is enough, you are enough, without enhancement, without expansion, just as you are. That doesn't mean the plant has no place, it just means the plant isn't the source. It's not the source of your insight. It's not the source of your peace. It's not the source of your connection to spirit. You are. The plant is just a mirror, a magnifier, a frequency enhancer. But what it enhances depends entirely on what you bring to it. And if what you bring is clarity, discipline, and intention, the plant can become a sacred companion. It can amplify prayers. It can deepen meditations. It can soften the veil between this world and the next. But if you bring confusion, avoidance, or desperation, it will reflect that too, and eventually you'll begin to associate cannabis not with clarity but with chaos, not with insight but with noise, not with soul but with craving. And the truth is, many have already arrived there, silently, shamefully, wondering why their once beautiful connection with cannabis now feels heavy, foggy, uninspired, wondering why they can't access the same highs, the same insights, the same sense of magic they once did, wondering if something broke. But nothing broke. The ritual became empty, the intention faded, the dialogue stopped, and in its place grew routine. But the good news is, the sacred never disappears. It simply waits for you to remember, waits for you to return, waits for you to approach the plant not as a habit but as a presence, as a spirit, as an elder guide whose teachings are too vast for casual use. And if you've ever sat in silence with cannabis, not smoked it but sat with it, you know that presence. You know the intelligence it carries. You've felt the vibrations shift. The air grows still, the way it seems to open an unseen layer of reality even before you inhale. That's not imagination, that's real. That's the plant's subtle field, and it responds to yours. That's why some of the most powerful work you can do with cannabis happens before the first breath, in the moment you ask permission, in the moment you offer gratitude, in the moment you sit and listen for guidance instead of chasing sensation. That's where the spiritual contract is either honored or ignored. Because you are entering into a contract, an agreement between you and a living being with ancient memory and cosmic purpose. You don't consume it, you merge with it. And that merging can elevate or entangle you depending on how consciously you engage. This is why in many mystical traditions, cannabis wasn't used daily. It wasn't a staple, it was a sacrament, reserved for sacred time, aligned with moon phases, used in rituals of passage, of death, of birth, of prophecy. It wasn't smoked out of boredom, it was invoked as a bridge between the physical and the etheric, between the mundane and the divine. Imagine if you treated it that way again. Imagine if every session was preceded by breathwork, prayer, and silence. If every exhale was an offering, not an escape. if every vision that came through you was met with reflection and reverence, not just fascination, your relationship with this plant is yours to redefine. You don't have to follow the culture. You don't have to consume just because everyone else is. You don't have to numb because it's socially accepted. You are allowed to walk a different path, a sacred path, one that honors your soul's evolution over your mind's stimulation. And if that means stepping away from cannabis for a time or forever, that doesn't mean you've failed. That doesn't mean you're missing out. It means you're listening. It means you're evolving. It means you've remembered that the real journey isn't outward, it's inward. The deepest high is not up, it's down, into the body, into the earth, into the heart of your own being. And when you root yourself there, when your spirit is anchored, clear and humble, then cannabis becomes what it was always meant to be, not a distraction, not an identity, but a spiritual ally, a companion on the path, a whisperer of truth in a world full of noise. But it can only do that if you choose to meet it differently. Every spiritual path will eventually ask you to confront your attachments, not just to people or possessions, but to the states of being you've grown comfortable in. And cannabis for many becomes one of those quiet attachments, not because it's evil, not because it's toxic, but because it makes discomfort more bearable. And that's the subtle trap, because what if the discomfort was there to initiate you? What if the anxiety you've been smoking away was a sacred messenger trying to get your attention? What if the restless thoughts, the emotional heaviness, the tension in your chest, what if those were not symptoms to escape, but signals to decode? What if every feeling you've labeled as negative was actually a doorway, not one to run from, but one to walk through? You see, cannabis doesn't remove the doorway, it just paints a mural over it. A beautiful one, yes, but it still covers the entrance. And sometimes, in that haze of pleasure or insight or comfort, you forget that healing doesn't happen by covering the wound. It happens by touching it, by witnessing it, by breathing into it until it softens and then letting it speak. That's what the mystics understood. That's why they used the plant as a spotlight, not a shield. They wanted to see more, not feel less. They didn't smoke to run away from pain. They smoked to meet it face to face. They weren't chasing vibes, they were invoking truth. And when the truth came, they didn't try to manage it. They surrendered to it. They let the tears come. They let the memories rise. They let the ego tremble and fall away. Because they knew the point was not to stay high. The point was to be emptied, so the real self could emerge. And that's what the plant is still trying to do. Every time you inhale, whether you realize it or not, you are giving yourself over to an initiatory process. You are telling the universe, I'm open to feeling something deeper. And the universe will answer, sometimes with beauty, sometimes with shadow, sometimes with a silence so loud it makes you tremble. But if you're only looking for the bliss, you'll miss the blessing, because the real blessing often hides in the darkness, in the moments when the high turns inward, and you're left alone with yourself. No distractions, no fireworks, just the quiet hum of your own soul asking, are you ready to come home? Cannabis doesn't create that question. It just turns up the volume, and if you've never learned to sit with yourself in the silence, that volume can feel overwhelming. But it's not punishment, it's invitation. Every uncomfortable high you've ever had, every moment where you felt anxious or paranoid or too exposed, those weren't bad trips. They were sacred mirrors. The plant saying, look, see, feel, heal, and maybe you weren't ready. Maybe no one told you that this was part of the journey. That sacred things don't always feel good, that medicine doesn't always taste sweet, that awakening often begins with disorientation. But now you know, now you've seen behind the veil, and now you can return to the plant with new eyes. Eyes that no longer seek escape, but seek alignment. Eyes that no longer beg for euphoria, but are willing to see clearly, even when it hurts. Because clarity is what your spirit craves more than comfort. And clarity isn't always gentle. Sometimes it breaks things. It dissolves illusions. It shows you where you've been lying to yourself, where you've been playing small, where you've been chasing an aesthetic of spirituality instead of doing the inner work. But in that breaking, something real begins. the part of you that has been quietly watching through all the highs and all the haze. That part starts to speak, the you underneath the masks, the one who never needed the plant to feel divine in the first place, the one who is always connected, always capable, always sacred. That's who the plant wants you to remember, not the identity you've built around it, not the rituals that have become routine, but the presence that was there before you ever took your first puff, the eternal self, the witness behind the experience. And once you reconnect with that presence, cannabis no longer holds the same grip. So you don't need it. You may still use it, but not from lack, not from longing, not from craving, from choice, from ceremony, from communion, and sometimes you'll choose not to use it at all, not because you're afraid of it, but because you've touched something even deeper in the silence it once helped you reach. That's the ultimate gift, when the tool teaches you how to access what it once revealed, and then gently steps aside. It doesn't mean the relationship is over. It means it's matured. It's moved from dependency to devotion, from habit to harmony, from consumption to co-creation. And that's the path your soul is calling you toward. A path of discernment, a path of presence, a path where every inhale is sacred and every exhale is a release of anything that no longer serves. Because this plant is powerful, and power when treated casually always becomes chaos, but when honored, when respected, when used as a sacred bridge, it becomes a blessing, a teacher, a vessel through which your highest self can emerge, not just during the high, but in the life you live afterward. So as you move forward, ask yourself, am I honoring the spirit of the plant, or just the feeling it gives me? Am I using cannabis to connect more deeply with truth, or to avoid a truth I don't yet want to face? There are no right answers, only honest ones, and in that honesty, your freedom begins. There's something sacred about asking the right question at the right time, and perhaps this is your moment. The moment you stop looking for answers outside of yourself and start listening to the intelligence already within you. Because that's what cannabis has been pointing to all along, not to itself, but to you, your breath, your energy, your light. And maybe over time the glow of the plant became more familiar than the glow of your own soul. But that doesn't mean the light is gone, it just means it's been waiting for your return. And you don't need a ritual to return. You don't need incense or music or a new strain with a spiritual-sounding name. You just need honesty, stillness, and the courage to be fully present with whatever shows up. The desire to know yourself more deeply than the temporary states you've grown attached to. Because you are not your high, you are not your peace, you are not even your clarity. You are the one witnessing it all, always. And when you reconnect with that witness, when you come back to the silent awareness beneath every experience, the need for enhancement begins to dissolve. Not because you're better than the plant, but because the plant has done its job. It's served its purpose. It's walked you to the threshold, and now the next step is yours alone. That's the bittersweet beauty of any real teacher. They eventually step aside, but not all at once. Sometimes it's gradual, sometimes it's a soft weaning, where you use the plant less and listen to yourself more, where the smoke lifts and reveals something deeper than any altered state could give you, the rawness of now, the medicine of the mundane, the holy ache of being fully alive, and in that space, even ordinary life becomes a ceremony. Washing your hands, making your bed, feeling your feet on the earth. These become rituals of presence. You no longer need to alter the frequency because you've become tuned to a deeper rhythm. You no longer need to chase the mystical because you see it in everything, in your breath, in your reflection, in the silence between your thoughts. That doesn't mean you never engage the plant again. It means when you do, it's with reverence, with full awareness of the path you're walking and the energy you're carrying into the exchange. You no longer smoke to feel something, you smoke to offer something. A prayer, a gratitude, a readiness to receive guidance you're prepared to integrate. And if you're not prepared, you wait. Because waiting is also sacred. Restraint is a form of power. a sign that your consciousness is no longer being led by desire alone but by discernment. And discernment is what separates the seeker from the wanderer. The wanderer wants more experience. The seeker wants more truth. And cannabis can offer both. But truth requires work, integration, accountability, a willingness to change after the insight has been given. And that's where most journeys stall, not because the plant failed, but because the user forgot that real awakening doesn't happen during the high. It happens in the life you lead once you come down. It happens in your decisions, your reactions, the way you treat others, the way you forgive, the way you stay honest even when it's uncomfortable. That's what determines whether your cannabis use is spiritual or not. Not the setting, not the strain, but the fruit it bears in your life. And you've felt the difference. The sessions that opened your heart, deepened your presence and brought you into sacred alignment, and the ones that left you numb, stuck, or spinning. You've felt the wisdom and the distortion, the clarity and the confusion, and now it's time to ask yourself, what kind of relationship do I want moving forward? Because that's what this is, a relationship. And relationships require communication, boundaries, time, space, respect. If you're using cannabis daily without question, without ritual, without reflection, then the relationship is out of balance. And when anything sacred becomes unbalanced, it stops serving your highest self. But the moment you remember that you have the power to recalibrate, to pause, to reflect, to listen, everything begins to shift. The veil lifts, the fog clears, and the deeper invitation reveals itself. To not just use the plant for spiritual experiences, but to become a more spiritual being, not just while high, but while doing the dishes, while walking through grief, while holding someone's hand, while forgiving yourself for all the moments you forgot your own light. That's the kind of spirituality the plant points to, not performance, not perfection, but presence. The willingness to be with what is, to touch the sacred in the simple, to awaken not through escape but through embodiment. And when you live that way, cannabis becomes what it was always meant to be. Not a crutch, not an identity, not even a constant companion, but a sacred visitor. A wise elder you sit with only when called, and when you do, it meets you in your strength. It reflects your clarity, it amplifies your knowing, because you're no longer leaning on it to find truth, you're bringing truth into the ceremony with you. And that's when you know you've grown. That's when you know the plant is no longer your gateway to divinity, because you've become the gateway. There's something powerful that happens when you stop asking the plant to take you somewhere and instead ask yourself why you keep leaving where you already are. Because your soul isn't in some distant realm. It's not locked behind visions or waiting in a cloud of smoke. It's here, right now, in your body, in your breath, in the very moment you're in. And cannabis can open the veil to that awareness, but it cannot substitute it. You've always had the key. The plant may have shown you the door. It may have let you peek through and feel something that reminded you of home. But the journey inward, the real homecoming, that's a path you walk sober, awake, anchored. And there comes a time when even sacred tools must be set down, not in rejection but in respect. Because once a student learns to walk without the cane becomes unnecessary. Not wrong, not bad, just unnecessary. And that's the space you may find yourself in now, a crossroads between familiar highs and unfamiliar presents, between patterns you've repeated and possibilities you've never fully explored, between dependency and sovereignty. Sovereignty doesn't mean cutting everything out of your life, it means nothing owns you, not your habits, not your cravings, not your past, not even your spiritual tools. It means being able to choose cannabis not from a place of lack, but from a place of clarity. It means being able to hear your inner yes and your inner no, and honoring both. And sometimes your no will surprise you. It will come softly, without fanfare, without guilt, just a whisper that says, not today. Not because you're resisting pleasure, but because you're listening to something deeper. A quiet calling back to your own raw essence. A chance to meet yourself fully without the middle layer, And when you do, you may notice something unexpected. You may notice your senses sharpen. You may notice your dreams return, your energy stabilize, your intuition become louder than it's been in years. Not because you consumed anything, but because you stopped consuming long enough to hear your soul. This is the gift of choosing pause. The medicine in the not doing. The power in the sacred reset. And if you've used cannabis for a long time, you might forget what your baseline even feels like. But there is a version of you that exists beyond the fog, beyond the ritual, beyond the stories you've wrapped around the smoke, and they are not a dull version, they are radiant, fierce, clear. They are you, unobstructed. And the more time you spend there, the more you may realize that you never needed cannabis to access spirit. You simply believed you did. Because the plant has a way of making the veil thin, the connection strong, the truth undeniable. But so does stillness. So does breath. So does an honest conversation with yourself in the dark. There are many roads to the sacred, and cannabis is just one. A beautiful one, but also a seductive one. A road that can feel like a shortcut, but still demands the same work once you arrive. Because every revelation still needs integration. Every vision still needs grounding. Every insight still needs action. And that's where so many get stuck, floating between insight and embodiment, remembering what they felt but not changing how they live, talking about what they saw but still making the same choices. And slowly the glow fades, not because it wasn't real, but because it wasn't embodied. And the soul doesn't evolve through ideas, it evolves through embodiment. So ask yourself, what has the plant shown you that you haven't yet lived? What part of your last experience is still waiting to be honored? What truth rose in the smoke and was never spoken out loud? What commitment did you make in your heart that you haven't yet followed through on? That's where the real work is, not in going back for more visions, but in living the ones you already received, in becoming the insight, in transforming revelation into reality. That's the moment the medicine stops being a substance and becomes your presence. And once that happens, cannabis is no longer the source of your spiritual power. It becomes a reflection of it. It joins you in your clarity. It dances with your devotion. It bows to your discernment. And when you feel that shift, when you no longer need it but simply choose it from a space of alignment, you'll know something profound has happened, not to the plant, but to you. Because this has never been about cannabis. It's been about your relationship with it, and beneath that your relationship with yourself, your capacity to trust your own inner compass, your ability to feel what you feel without flinching, your willingness to grow, not just when it feels good but when it requires letting go. Letting go of identity, letting go of attachment, letting go of the idea that something outside of you can complete what was always whole. This is the journey the plant has been pointing you toward, and whether you continue walking with it or choose a different path, let that path be sacred. Let your steps be intentional. Let your life be the ceremony. Because you are not here to chase highs, you are here to become like you came here searching for answers about a plant, but maybe you're leaving with something deeper. Maybe this was never just about cannabis. Maybe it was about your own evolution, your own awakening, your own capacity to choose a path that feels true in a world constantly offering distraction. And maybe, just maybe, the plant led you here so that it could finally hand the torch back to you. Because no medicine, no ritual, no tool, however ancient or sacred, can replace the responsibility of your own becoming. At some point you must decide what kind of vessel you are going to be. Will you be one that uses sacred things to numb? Or one that treats every act as a prayer? Will you walk through life seeking altered states? Or will you become the kind of person who alters reality through the clarity of your presence? Cannabis can be an ally in that journey. It can show you things you didn't know you needed to see. It can soften the veil. It can stir your imagination. It can bring buried feelings to the surface with precision. But it cannot walk the path for you. It cannot do the breathing. It cannot transmute the pain. It cannot meditate on your behalf, or love in your place, or hold the mirror longer than you're willing to look. And at some point every seeker must choose, am I ready to walk without the crutch? Not because I have to, but because I am curious to see who I am without it. Because I trust that if something beautiful came through while I was high, it must already exist inside me. Because I want to feel that truth, not just in altered states, but in the quiet morning light, in the laughter of a friend, in the tears that fall for no reason but feel like freedom. That's what awaits when you remember how sacred your sober presence is. Not plain, not boring, sacred, because when your nervous system calms not from smoke but from breath, when your heart opens not from THC but from truth, when your visions come not from consumption but from communion with the divine that already lives inside you, that's when the path shifts from seeker to seer. And maybe you still use the plant, but now you're walking beside it, not behind it, not clinging to it. You're not waiting for it to make you feel something. You're bringing feeling into the space. You're showing up with your own fire, your own stillness, your own connection, and the plant meets you there not to carry you, but to walk beside you. That's the maturity of real spiritual practice, not abandonment of tools, but evolution of how you use them. It's not about puritanical denial. It's about sacred responsibility. It's about asking not just how cannabis affects you, but how your energy affects the experience. Because you are the altar, and what you bring to it matters. So ask yourself again, what would it look like to treat your next session as a ceremony? To fast from distraction, to prepare your body, to bless the herb before lighting it, to speak to the spirit of the plant as you would to a guide or an ancestor, to inhale not with craving but with reverence, to let the silence speak louder than the sensations, and when the messages come to write them down, to honor them, to act on them, because if the plant gives you insight, it is your sacred duty to live it. Insight without embodiment is spiritual bypassing, and bypassing may feel like relief, but it robs you of transformation. You were not sent here to float above your life, you were sent here to embody it, to root the divine into your actions, to make your life the medicine. And the beautiful irony is that when you do that, when you stop needing the high, you begin to experience a more subtle, more sustainable kind of elevation, the kind that doesn't come in waves but settles in your bones, the kind that doesn't depend on substances but flows from alignment, the kind that stays with you long after the smoke has cleared. So if you choose to continue with cannabis, let it be a conscious choice. Let it be rare enough to remain sacred. Let it be honest. Let it be respectful. Let it be in service to something greater than the momentary escape. And if you choose to step away, do it with grace. Not out of shame, but out of sovereignty. Because your path is yours to walk, and no one, not a guru, not a system, not even the plant, can walk it for you. This is your initiation, and your soul already knows the way. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are not too late to remember who you are beneath it all. You are the clarity you've been searching for. You are the peace waiting beneath the smoke. You are the sacred ceremony in motion, and now you have a choice. You can continue to use cannabis unconsciously and keep circling the same mountains, or you can begin again, right here, right now, not with guilt, not with fear, but with reverence, with intention, with love, and with the deepest knowing that the real high, the true expansion, the most profound connection has always lived inside of you.